Hey class, I want to make a quick video on how we built Fire, the first layer of Fire on November 12th, so that if you were behind or if you were absent, you won't fall further behind. Okay, so first things first, let's go ahead and click on our class website. Under the class work tab, you should see a module 5 at the very top, a module 5 material link. What you have here is the slides that give detailed instructions on what our parameters were, okay, and also the Fire texture. So let's go ahead and click on the My Fire texture. The My Fire texture is just a texture that I created. Go ahead and click on Download. By default, it will download it into your Downloads folder, okay. So you should have Unity open. So what we're going to do first is go ahead and create our Fire objects. Okay. So you can right click here or right click under Game Object. We're going to create a effect, Particle Systems. Okay. And we're going to rename it to My Fire Particles. We're also going to right click and create a empty object. We're going to call it the My Fire Parent. Okay, and we're going to make My Fire Particle a child of My Fire Parent by just left clicking and holding and dropping it in. Okay, now let's go ahead and move the fire close to our character so that we could see it using the play button. As you can see, for me, it needs to be a little bit lower. Okay, so something like that. Okay. All right. The next thing we do is we're going to create, we're going to actually go ahead and import our texture. So you should have already created a My Assets folder with all the things that you created. We're going to right click and we're going to import a new asset. Okay. Now under import new assets, you're going to go to the downloads folder, and you can see in the downloads folder you see that I downloaded My Fire texture. So go ahead and click on My Fire texture, the one that you downloaded from our class website, and now you can see right here that it's been added to our project now that we can use it. Now before we can use our texture, we have to create a material. So we're going to right click inside the My Asset folder. I'm going to go to Create. I'm going to create a material. So when you create a material, it's going to highlight the rename tool. Let's go ahead and rename it to My Fire Material. Okay, and you can see right now under the My Fire Material, it's just basically the standard shaders and standard colors and everything that Unity comes default with. Now that we have the My Fire texture and the My Fire Material, let's go and click back on My Fire Particles. Under My Fire Particles, you'll see that there are multiple tabs here in the inspector window. Okay, you can always collapse any of them. Okay, we're going to go to the last one called Render. Okay, and you can see under Render that the default particle system material is basically the default one that was provided. We're going to replace that with My Fire Material, the one that we just created. All you have to do is left click it from our My Assets folder and drop it right on top of the material inside the Render folder. Now, as you can see, now, it's just basically a bunch of white squares, okay, emitting from it. Now, under the now that you added My Fire Material, if you scroll down now, you'll see that there's a My Fire Material component added to Particle Systems. So we're going to click on the drop-down menu, and we are going to actually change the shader. We're going to change the shader from standard to particles and priority alpha blended. Okay. Now, so your shader now is particles priority alpha blended, And if you click down the drop down menu again, you see that there's no texture. Now, I created this fire texture for you guys. Go ahead and use it by left clicking the My Fire texture, left click and holding it, and dragging it into the texture. Now that you dragged it and dropped it into the My Fire material texture, you can see now the texture that I created. Now you can see the texture I created. It's like a 4 kind of blobs, right? It's meant to be like fire blobs, okay? And I try to make it random as possible, try to make it look as natural as possible, okay? Now, first thing is we're going to notice that obviously I don't want these 4 textures being, or silhouettes being used in sets of 4. I want to make it basically randomized. So under the My Particle System, under the inspector window, you're going to see one called Texture Sheet Animation. So left click Texture Sheet Animation. You'll see here that it's a 1x1 tile. That's what I think it is, but we actually made it as a 2x2 tile. When you change it to 2x2 tile now, you can see that my textures are being used, but you know, it looks like it starts out as the first blob, then goes out as a second blob, then becomes a third blob, and eventually the 4th blob, right? Which is not very natural at all. So what we're going to do now is we're going to change the start frame, okay? So right now, you can see right here under the texture sheet animation, it's frame over time. We're going to click the drop down menu, and we're going to make it random between 2 constants, okay? So technically we have 4 frames. We're going to make it between 0 and 4, okay? And now you can see that the textures that are, you know, being emitted is random. So once in a while it'll be my big blobs, once in a while it'll be my skinny blobs, once in a while it'll be my double blobs, and then some of my skinny blobs, so on and so forth. Okay. Now we're gonna go ahead and change the shape. And by the way, I'm just gonna be left clicking these to kind of collapse the options. Otherwise, we're gonna be overwhelmed by the options. I'm gonna click on the shape option, and now you can see that the cone is very big. And we're gonna change this to a smaller angle. Right now it's default at 25 degrees. We're going to make it a 5-degree angle, right? And now you can again see that it's got more narrow. We're going to change the radius. Instead of being 1, we're going to change it to 0.1 so that we have a very small radius, and the fire is kind of more skinnier and more intense, okay? We're actually going to go back. Okay, so we're going to collapse shape. So now we're done with the shape. We're going to go back to the My Fire Particle default properties, and we're going to change some of these settings to make it look more like fire. So first things first, we're going to change the start lifetime. That's now at 5 to 2.5. Now, let me zoom out a little bit. When it was originally at 5, I'm going to go change it back to 5 real quick. You can see that the fire goes like all the way up into the sky because it's living too long. So by changing from 5 to 2.5, you're now limiting its lifespan by half. So now it's only 2.5. Again, we can come back and change this later if we so choose. Again, this is still kind of really tall, but we're going to add gravity and things like that that will make it much shorter. Okay. And the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to change the start speed. Right now, the speed of this fire is 5, which just means it's shooting at a rate of 5 upward. Now, if we lower this to, let's say, 1.5, you can see the fire get dramatically shorter because now it's not shooting as fast for 2.5 seconds. Now it's only shooting at 1.5 seconds, or 1.5 speed for 2.5 seconds. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to change the size. The fire right now is kind of narrow like a flamethrower. We're going to try to change it so that it's a little bit more wider and a little bit more bigger. So we're going to change it to 2.5. So now it looks more like a blaze of fire. Okay. So we change it to 2.5. All right, so that does it, I think, for our speeds and our start color. I mean, our start. Actually, this is something we can do right now. Let's go ahead and add a little bit of gravity. So we're going to go to the gravity modifier. We're going to change it to 0.04. Okay, and you can see by making it 0.04, the fire is not as high because we're adding a gravity multiplier. Let's go ahead and make this a negative 0.04. Okay, so there's some gravity, but not too much gravity. Okay, We're also going to do it so it rotates. Right now, it's kind of going in a cylindrical, non-random cylinder. We're going to go to basically the start rotation. You see here it is set up at 0. I'm going to hit the drop-down menu. We're going to do random between two constants. And we're going to go, and this is in degrees. I'm going to do negative 45 degrees to positive 45 degrees. And now you see the fire, rotate a little bit more, so it's not as symmetrical in its creation. Now let's talk about the most important part about creating our first layer of fire, and that's color. Okay, so we're going to collapse the fire particles, and we're going to go to color over its lifetime. Okay, so when you click on color over its lifetime, go and left click it to make sure that it's highlighted, and we're going to change the color by clicking on the color bar, and you'll see now we have a gradient editor. Now think of the gradient editor very similar to how we deal with animations. We're going to create basically keyframes. We're going to first create a alpha frame, okay, being the top bar, and then we're going to change the color frame on the bottom. So top one is the alpha frame, the bottom one is the color frame. So let's start with the alpha frame. So I'm going to click on the upper left alpha frame that's defaulted right now at 255. We're going to change that to 0. So you can change it here or use the scroll down menu, and you can see now that by making the first alpha, the start frame, basically pitch black at 0, you can see that it starts out like basically invisible, kind of like smoke, right? And we're going to move the second frame, the end frame, to about, I'd say about 25%. Okay, and again, you can make the exact location using the location menu right here. So at 25%, I want it to be a full flame. And we're going to now create a new keyframe. In order to create a new keyframe, just go ahead and click on the upper right. Kind of click right there. All right, and you kind of click a couple twice. We're going to again make it go back down to alpha 0. So I made an end frame of 0, a start frame of 0, and at 25% mark, I made it 255 degrees. I'm sorry, 255 alpha, which kind of means it starts out not so bright, basically dim, then it gets very bright, and at the end, it gets very dark. Now, now that we start adding color, you'll see that it come to life. Now for color, flames kind of start out not that strong and get stronger in the middle. So we're going to go to about 20%, or you can just move this to about 20%. If you want to be exact, you can use the 20% tool. We're going to go to 20%, and we're going to choose the color by clicking on the color window here, and you can see the color window pop out here. And we're going to make it a bright yellow. So by clicking on the bright yellow here, you're selecting the color, but again, you got to choose the brightness, and right now it's like basically bright white. We're going to move this all the way to the upper right corner, which basically makes it a very yellow color. Okay. Now we're going to add another color frame. We can drag this one right here if we want. So I'm going to drag it to about the 40% mark. Again, you can use the location tool to go to exactly 40%. And I'm going to change the color at 40% by clicking on the color window to kind of a bright orange. Okay. This may be maybe a more red orange. Okay. So a more reddish color orange. Again, you can play around with these numbers. It doesn't have to be exact, but you get the right idea. And eventually, at the top of the fire, fire's going to start out a little bit yellow, maybe a little bit more red, and at the very top, it's going to become black. So again, we're going to add another color frame by kind of dragging where we want it, okay, like double-clicking. And now we're going to change the color to completely black. So we're just going to move the transparency down to black, and now we have a black color at the end of the smoke. Now maybe I don't like the yellow color being so dominant here. Maybe I'm going to lower it down from maybe 20% down to 15%. You know, whatever you feel like is the right number for you to make fire look like fire. And now we have our first layer of fire. Now you can see right now that the fire looks kind of pixelated. It's not going at a fast enough rate, or not enough of them. So you can always go back and change the speed if you like. The most important ones, if you want to make it look more realistic, is go to the emission tab and change the rate over time. Right now is basically creating 10 particles every, I believe, 10 particles every 1 second. Now, if we change this to, let's say, 100, you'll see that there are basically 100 particles in here. Now, obviously, the more particles you have, the more realistic it will look, and what sizes and whatnot. We could reduce it down to, let's say, 50. Maybe 100 was too much. Maybe 50. And you can see now the fire look a little bit more realistic looking. Okay. Maybe let's go even lower. Let's go maybe 25. I don't know. 25 still looks kind of too blotchy. Let's change it back to 50. Okay. And again, this is up for you to play with. I'm kind of just teaching you the basics. You can go in and change all the things you want. Maybe you don't like the particle size so big. Right now, the particle size, start size is 2.5. Maybe you want to make your fire look smaller, like each particle to be a little bit smaller. So instead of 2.5, let's go and make it half the size. Let's make it 1. Okay. So now you can see that the particles got a little bit smaller. Maybe one's too small. Maybe you try 1.5. Okay. Again, this is up to you and how fast you want it to go, and how high you want it to go, and these are little settings that you can play with until you kind of get the fire the way you want it to appear. Again, this is only the first layer of fire. We're going to be adding 3 more layers to make the fire look more realistic in later tutorials. But hopefully this gets you caught up to our class on November 12th, which is a Tuesday.